The year was 1473, and winter clung to the kingdom of Renova with a cruel iron grip. The snow lay heavy upon the eaves of the castle roofs, and the river that snaked through the valley was frozen, its surface dulled and black beneath the waning moon. High above that valley stood the fortress of King Aldrich III, a monarch whose name was spoken with equal measures of reverence and fear. The peasants bent their knees to him out of terror rather than loyalty, for though his rule brought order, it was an order steeped in blood and shadows. Within the stone halls of his castle, a fire roared in the great hearth, yet the warmth it offered seemed unable to soften the man who sat upon the throne. Aldrich was broad-shouldered, his hair dark and shot with strands of silver, though he was but 40. His eyes were a cold gray, like steel wet with frost, and when they fixed themselves upon a soul, that soul trembled. On this night, however, his gaze lingered not upon his court, nor upon the nobles whispering in their velvet cloaks, but upon a woman who sat at his side, his queen, Ellsworth. Ellsworth was young still, no more than 23 summers, her beauty, unblemished by time, her spirit unbroken, or so it had been when she had first been given to him. She was not of noble birth. Her family were minor lords from the southern marches, their wealth grown from vineyards and trade rather than war. Aldrich had chosen her not for politics, but for her face, a face that haunted him with its calm radiance, that seemed to hold something he could neither master nor own. And though he had made her queen, he never ceased to remind her she was his possession, bound to him by the laws of both God and crown. Yet Ellsworth had a fire within her, and though she spoke with grace and measured words, there were times when her defiance cut through his armor more deeply than any blade. She spoke often of mercy, of compassion for the poor, of the need for kindness in rule. In her presence, the whispers of discontent among the nobles grew sharper, for she did not fear to remind Aldrich of his cruelties. It was during the feast of St. Agnes that fate turned. The hall was laden with the scent of roasted venison, of spiced wine, of candle wax dripping from iron sconces. Minstrels played, though their melodies faltered when Aldrich's voice rose in anger. One of his vassals, Lord Brant, had dared to withhold levy men for the king's coming war in the north. When Aldrich denounced him before all, it was Ellsworth who intervened. "My lord," she said, her voice soft yet clear enough to silence the room, "perhaps Lord Brant withholds because his people starve. To strip them of their sons when the fields are barren is to condemn them all." Aldrich's jaw clenched, and the veins in his temple swelled. To be challenged in the sight of his court, by a woman, by his wife, was a humiliation he could not suffer. He turned toward her, and though his lips smiled, his words were daggers. "You speak boldly, my queen," he said, "as though mercy were a crown you alone could wear. But what do women know of rule? What do women know of war?" Ellsworth did not lower her gaze. "What do men know of mercy?" A hush fell over the hall. Even the fire seemed to falter. Aldrich felt the weight of eyes upon him, eyes that saw in his queen's defiance a fracture in his power. His hands tightened on the arms of his throne until his nails dug grooves in the wood. That night, when the feast had ended and the courtiers were gone, Aldrich summoned his most loyal counselor, Bishop Harold, a thin man whose cassock smelled of incense and whose eyes glittered with opportunism. "She seeks to shame me," Aldrich growled, pacing the chamber like a caged beast. "She would have them see me weak, ruled by a woman's tongue." Harold bowed his head, though his lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "The people love her, sire. She speaks to their suffering in a way you cannot. That love may be turned against you if it grows unchecked." Aldrich turned sharply. "Then what am I to do? Kill her and make her a martyr? No, I will not give them that." His voice lowered, dark and trembling. But she will learn silence. She will learn obedience. The bishop's voice was smooth as oil. There are chambers beneath the east tower. Long have they stood empty since the days of your grandsire. Thick walls, narrow windows, iron locks. None who are placed there return, unless you will it. A prison fit not for a queen, but for a rebellious wife. Aldrich's eyes narrowed, and a cruel light flickered there. Yes, he whispered, let her live, but let her vanish. Let her beauty rot where none can see it. Let the people forget. The next day dawned gray, the sky heavy with snow. Elswith woke to the sound of boots on the stair and the clatter of steel. Before she could rise, the door of her chamber burst open, and guards flooded in. She looked to her husband, who stood at the threshold, cloaked in black, his face carved from ice. "My lord?" she asked, her voice unsteady for the first time. Aldrich spoke with cold finality. "You are queen no longer, Elswith. You are a traitor to my crown, a serpent in my bed. By my decree, you shall be confined until death relieves you." Her breath caught, and the world seemed to tilt. "Confined? You cannot—" "I am the king," he thundered, and his words shook the stone walls. The guards seized her, binding her wrists, though she struggled. She cried out, not for herself, but for her children, 2 young sons who slept in the adjoining chamber. "Let me see them! Aldrich, by God, let me see them once more!" But Aldrich did not answer. His eyes were fixed ahead, unflinching, as though her pleas were nothing but the howling of the wind. They dragged her through the corridors, down the spiral stair, through a passage none but the jailers knew. The air grew colder, the stones damp, until they reached the east tower, its door barred with iron. Inside, a narrow stair climbed into shadow. Up they went, until at last they reached a chamber near the top, a room of stone with a single window, no wider than a man's arm, overlooking the bleak forest below. They thrust her inside, cut her bonds, and slammed the door. The sound of the lock turning was like a death knell. Elswith rushed to the door, beating her hands against it until her knuckles bled, crying out Aldrich's name. Only silence answered. She turned to the window, the world outside small and distant, a world she might never touch again. Snow drifted past like ashes. Her body trembled, but not from the cold. It was the tremble of a bird cast into a cage, wings clipped, heart breaking. And as the bells of the castle tolled the hour of prayer, Elswith sank to her knees upon the icy floor. She whispered not to her husband, nor to the guards who mocked her through the stone, but to the God she had always clung to. "Let me endure. Let me endure until justice comes." Far below, in the king's hall, Aldrich raised a cup of wine. His courtiers feigned cheer, their laughter hollow. Yet in the shadows at the edge of the hall, Lord Brant whispered to another noble, and the whisper was like a spark upon dry tinder. The queen was gone, but her absence was louder than her voice had ever been, and in that silence, rebellion began to breathe. The tower became her tomb long before her body withered. Elswith awoke each morning to the pale smear of light that bled through the slit of her window, and she lay down each night to the groaning of timbers in the wind. The chamber was bare. A pallet of straw, a basin of water, a stool, and a crucifix nailed to the wall, its Christ figure blackened with age. She was given bread hard as stone and broth so thin it scarcely colored the bowl. The guards who carried her meals would not meet her eyes. Some spat at the floor as they left. Others muttered prayers as though her presence cursed them. At first she screamed until her voice cracked and bled. She pounded at the stones with her fists, her cries echoing down the empty stairwell. She begged for her sons, begged for the chance to touch their hair, to hold them once more. But only silence answered. Days folded into weeks, weeks into months. Ellsworth began to mark the passing of time by scratching lines into the mortar with a shard of broken pottery she had pried from the floor. When she lost count, she began again. Outside the window, seasons changed. Snow melted into rain. Rain gave way to green, then to gold, then to snow again. The world continued, but she remained, frozen in the tower. Her thoughts became her only companions. She remembered the vineyards of her father's land, the smell of ripe grapes in the sun, the laughter of her sisters. She remembered her wedding. Night, when she had been led into the great hall of Renova, her body trembling with fear, yet tempered by hope that she might bring gentleness to a house of iron. She remembered her sons, Edric the elder with eyes like hers, little Theobald, whose laugh had been a bell of joy. These memories burned within her, both comfort and torment, yet bitterness too grew in her heart. For each day Aldrich let her rot in the tower, she cursed him. She cursed the crown upon his brow, the stones of the castle, the bishop who whispered poison in his ear. At night, when the wind moaned through the cracks, she spoke her curses aloud, her voice shaking with fury. May his throne turn to ash, may his soul never find peace. But beyond the stone walls, Ellsworth's absence had not been forgotten. Whispers slithered through the court. Some said she had died suddenly, taken by fever. Others murmured she had been sent away to a convent. But too many servants had seen her dragged toward the East Tower. Too many had heard her cries echoing. Down the stair, Lord Brant was the first to give those whispers teeth. In the smoky chambers of taverns, in the quiet of hunting lodges, he spread word. The Queen lived, but in chains. Her beauty was wasted in darkness, her innocence punished as treason. Soon others joined him, discontented nobles whose lands had been taxed into ruin, merchants stripped of their gold to fund the king's endless wars. A queen, wronged and imprisoned, became the banner beneath which their anger gathered. Meanwhile, Aldrich's throne grew colder. Though he sat upon it each day, draped in sable and gold, he felt the silence press in upon him like a weight. His queen's voice no longer rebuked him, yet in his dreams he heard her still, soft, sorrowful, condemning. He awoke in the night, drenched in sweat, certain he heard footsteps pacing the halls outside his chamber. More than once he rose and threw open the door, sword in hand, only to find emptiness. Bishop Harold counseled him to pay no heed to such fancies. The devil plays tricks, sire. The queen was your temptation, your weakness. She is silenced now. Renova needs only your strength. But Aldrich could not silence the gnawing unease. One winter evening, after drinking deep of mulled wine, he climbed the spiral stair of the East Tower himself. The guards stiffened, uncertain whether to follow. He waved them away. Alone, he unlocked the heavy door and stepped inside. Ellsworth sat on the floor, her hair tangled, her cheeks hollowed by hunger, yet her eyes were unbroken fire. She rose when she saw him, the chains at her ankles clinking. For a long moment, husband and wife faced one another across the dim chamber. "You still live," Aldrich said at last, his voice thick. "You still breathe," Ellsworth answered. "A pity." He flinched, though he masked it with a sneer. "You brought this fate upon yourself. You would shame me before my court, weaken me before my enemies. You left me no choice." "You always had a choice," she whispered. "You chose cruelty." Her words struck him with a force he had not expected. He stepped closer, seized her wrist, and hissed, "You think they will remember you? You think the world will mourn you? You are nothing now. Forgotten." But Ellsworth smiled, faintly, and the sight unnerved him more than her defiance. "The world remembers injustice. Stones cannot hide it. Not even kings can silence it." Aldrich released her as though her touch burned him. He turned and left the chamber, the slam of the door echoing down the stair. Yet her words followed, him gnawing at his mind. That night, sleep fled from him once more. Outside the castle, rebellion gathered like storm clouds. Messengers rode under cover of night. Secret vows were sworn over goblets of wine. Men sharpened their swords in silence, waiting. One autumn morning, a parchment sealed in black wax was found nailed to the doors of the cathedral in Renova's capital. It bore no name, only these words: "The king is a tyrant who keeps his queen locked in chains. He has betrayed God and crown. Let those who love justice rise." The city awoke in uproar. The parchment was torn down, but copies appeared again and again, as if the words themselves could not be smothered. Priests whispered them from pulpits. Mothers told them to their sons as they marched to market. The rumor became truth. Truth became fuel. Aldrich raged when he heard. He summoned his council, accused them of treachery, demanded to know who had spread the lies. None dared confess, but he saw suspicion in every face. Even his knights seemed to look upon him with cold eyes. The storm was rising, and he could not stop it. And in the east tower, Elswith knelt by her window, watching the valley below. From that narrow slit, she saw torchlights flicker in the distance. Not the usual patrols, but larger, moving like restless fire across the land. She pressed her hand to the stone, her heart racing. She did not yet know whose torches they were, nor whether they would bring her deliverance or doom. But she knew one thing: the kingdom was shifting. The silence that had smothered her was breaking, and with it so too would chains.